I'm Tom Canetti, and welcome to Uncensored Stories. Today, we're welcomed by Atar once again. Thanks for joining us, mate.
Thanks for inviting me.
No problem. So, we're here to talk about the current political turmoil, I guess you could say, in Israel in regards to their elections. So, why don't you just break it down a little bit for us? What's going on with your elections in Israel?
Okay, so I'll start it by explaining the current political situation, and as the conversation progresses, we can talk maybe a bit about the different issues within Israeli society. So Israel is a parliamentary democracy. The way our election system works is basically every 4 years, supposedly every 4 years, we have elections, and you vote for the party. You don't vote for a candidate. You vote for the Knesset, which is the legislative body of Israel. And basically, we have 120 seats in the Knesset. So each party gets a number of seats, and you have to make a coalition. The coalition has to be 61 or over in order to be a majority. So now, in the past 2 years, we've had 4 rounds of elections. Now we're having our 4th round of elections. And this is because they couldn't make a coalition. It's the first time this has ever happened in Israeli history. Usually we had unstable governments that, broke off maybe after a year and a half or 2 years or something like that. But we've never had a scenario like that. So it all started 2 years ago in April 2019. Where they tried to we had elections, they couldn't make a government. Then we went to a 2nd round of elections, and they couldn't make a government there. And then we went to a 3rd round of elections, and then they made a very, very fragile and unstable government that lasted for about 9 months until about 2 weeks ago. It broke off, and in the Israeli constitutional law, when government breaks off, you go to another round of elections. So here we are at 4th round of elections in under 2 years.
Can you just explain how the government can form this coalition? Do you have the equivalent of like a lower and upper house in Israel?
No. It's very similar to the system in New Zealand. We also have 120 seats. So before Israel was formed, we had the British Mandate. So a lot of the system is taken from that, but it also was created by some Israeli law experts. So the way it works is it's very similar to the way the House of Commons in the UK works. You vote, but instead of an area where you have the first past the post, the one that wins the majority, all of Israel is like one area like that. So you don't have to be afraid that your vote is going to the trash. But
there's no state and federal government. There's only the federal government.
Yeah, there's only the federal government. You don't have bicameral chambers or something like that. You've got one chamber, and from that chamber you make the government. So the government is formed from within the Knesset. So
okay. Is there any sort of requests or desire for federation within Israel, or to sort of like fight against the abuse of power by the federal government, or is it too small of a country?
Well, that's something I've been arguing for. Like personally, I'd really like to see a federal system here, but it's not really something that is talked about. And the issues that are in the public discourse are so foreign to these ideas. They're very particular to the Israeli discourse, and that's what I wanted to talk about. The politics in Israel has become increasingly very, very personal. We used to talk maybe a bit more about different ideologies or worldviews, but now I think Israel is going through a very similar process that the U.S. went through by making the politics very personal, very focused on the person heading the party. If it's Trump versus Biden, so here it's basically if you're pro Bibi, Bibi is the prime minister, or you're against Bibi. So in America, you've got the Trumpists and the never Trumpers. At least that's what so here you've got Bibist, which if you're pro Bibi, or the only not Bibi, or just that's like the literal translation from Hebrew. So never Bibist. So that's the main political discourse. If you're either pro-Bibi
Okay.
or anti-Bibi.
And is it due to policy or due to his personality?
Yeah, so this is I think the main issue in Israeli politics, and it's because of several factors. So Bibi has been in Israeli politics, since the 80s. He's 71 right now, and he's been prime minister in the 90s, and he's been the prime minister since 2009 continuously. So for almost 12 years now. So he's the longest serving Israeli prime minister. And I also checked, he's the second longest serving head of state of a democratic state, like after Angela Merkel. So they're very close. Like in total, he's been prime minister for 15 years. So there is that. But the other...
sorry. Let's just differentiate between the roles of the prime minister and the president. Because the role of the prime minister in Israel is far more important than the president, right?
Yeah. The president here is very ceremonial. It's actually quite similar to the role of the president in Germany. The president has mostly ceremonial powers. The only real power that the president has is by granting clemency, which is pretty rare, kind of like the parting power of the U.S. president. I don't think it does. He mostly uses it on very, very specific cases that the public does not know about. And the second power is the one. Let's say we had elections. Your party, let's call it Tom's party, got 30 seats, so it's a quarter of the votes, and you want to form a government, which you're going to head. So you go to the president and you ask him to grant you the mandate to form the government. So he gives you, let's say, 6 weeks, and you have to have at least 61 people voting for you as the head of the government, as the prime minister, and the president is the one that gives you the mandate. But it's mostly, it's mostly procedural power. It's not really something that is supposed to be apolitical. It's supposed to be, very inclusive to all the factions, and he can't have express his political views.
Right. So this pro or anti-Bibi situation, is there an alternative candidate that the anti-Bibis are promoting, or is it just a sort of dissent for his own personality and his policy?
Yeah, so before I'm going to touch about the other candidates, there is an important political process that's going on in Israel. Bibi has been indicted, he hasn't gone to trial yet, for 3 charges of bribery. I think it's called in English bribery, maybe misdemeanors, and breach of public trust. So he has had 3 cases where he's been accused by the Attorney General. The Attorney General said they're going to indict him. Basically, this has been the main focus of the political system. So Bibi is obviously from the right, so the leftist factions have said we can't have a prime minister with 3 indictment charges serving as a prime minister, and the right has basically said that the persecution in Israel is going after him. It's a witch hunt, and that the crimes which he has supposedly committed are not real crimes. We can touch the crimes if you'd like, or
please.
Okay, so Bibi basically has 3 main three main scandals. So the first one, it's called the 1000 case, which basically means he got a lot of gifts, cigars and champagnes and very expensive gifts, totaling I think about 700,000 shekels, which in US dollars I would say is about 250,000 US dollars. And supposedly he got these gifts from like a billionaire. His name is Arnon Milchan, which is a movie producer. He produced the movie about Freddie Mercury and some other films. You can look him up. His name is like a big name in Hollywood. And supposedly he gave him some, I think, like some protection or regulatory changes in order to make his businesses run in an easier fashion in Israel or something like that. That's what the public.
Okay.
That's what is known to the public. The second one is the 2000 case, which basically Bibi supposedly tried to advocate for a bill that's going to limit the circulation of a newspaper in Israel that is free. That is, it's a very big competitor to the main newspaper. It's called Yediot Achronot, and the guy owning Yediot Achronot would obviously have a lot to gain from that, and in return, the quid pro quo is that Moses, the guy owning the newspaper, would cover Bibi in a more favorable light. So this leads us to the third case, which is very similar to the 2000 case, which is basically granting favors to some billionaire that's owning some media corporations in order to get better coverage. And now there's a very, very interesting question in law if you could get good coverage as a bribe, which is a big question in law and governance, and also there's the question of, do you want to make a precedent with a prime minister, because no one has ever been indicted on these charges as far as I know. So that's the main argument from the right. They say that you can't really indict him on these charges. So there's a big debate over
why, because they're not legitimate charges.
Because because it's not really said so in the law, and you don't want to make
that you can't accept a bribe from a media outlet.
No, that the bribe itself, it cannot be good coverage, because their argument basically says we can't. If now someone covers another politician in a favorable light, then we can't use that as a reason to investigate the person. That's the main argument. Or that in democratic countries they do that all the time. Let's say I'm a politician, I leak something to the press, and the press gives me good coverage, and it happens all the time. That's the main argument.
But did they prove any monetary transaction from the media outlet or from this billionaire towards the political party or any members of that party?
That's the thing, that the monetary gain is not something in money. It's in good coverage.
Okay, right. So Bibi was doing favors for this billionaire, which weren't money. Wasn't a transaction, but political favors, and also for the media outlet as well.
Yeah.
So
Okay,
right.
Yeah, and there's a lot of questions. How much did you know? And it's a very complicated case. I mean, we have known about this case for the past 5 years, and it's taken a while until he was even indicted and investigated in the police. And
Do you know what sort of favors he was doing for them, or are there accusations on what those favors were?
So the 2000 case was he tried to advocate for a bill, which he actually didn't vote on eventually. So it's kind of problematic to charge him with that. And with the 4000 case, it was basically like a merger between two corporations. That there was some regulatory hurdle that he tried to overcome, and it would help the billionaire save a lot of money. And for that, the billionaire tried to change the way that you see how he talks to the people under him, like the journalists, is don't publish this about Bibi, because if you do that, then he's going to screw us over, and I'm going to lose a lot of money. So that's what we know, but it's very difficult to. It's a very, very difficult case.
So essentially, he's trying to alleviate tax from the billionaire's business or his own financial income in return for better coverage in the media. Yeah. So what's the division like in the media? Is there freedom of press in Israel? Is there a diverse range of different media outlets in terms of their political ideology, or is it quite polarized like in the US, or what's the media situation like in Israel?
So it's actually, I see a lot of similarities in our politics to the politics in America, both with regards to the media and both with regards to the populist rhetoric of leaders of Bibi and Trump. Bibi and Trump have very similar lines. So the media in Israel, it's actually very, very small. It's not that diverse. We've got like three main news channels. One of them is like kind of like NPR, like it's something that's with government money, but it's supposed to be, you know, like centrist or representing all of Israel. Obviously, the right says it's leftist, and I'm not sure if the left says it's a right wing, but mostly the right here is saying that the media is biased against Bibi, and it's like leftist. It's very similar to what Trump is saying, you know, about CNN and stuff like that. And there is some merit to that claim, to those claims, but obviously most of them are not done, you know, in kind of like good faith fashion. It's mostly as a trope for attacking, and you know, there is one right-wing outlet which is trying to be like Fox News, but it's very small and it's not really influential. Most of the journalists here, you know, they operate through Twitter and other means, and there are some like more right-wing journalists than there used to be in the past. But it's also like an issue, you know, the lack of diversity, so-called, in Israeli media.
And do you think that those there has been this media bias influenced by Bibi over the last several years? Do you feel like a lot of the contents of articles and news stories were swayed as a result of these favors that he was doing?
Oh, the favors, it was in a newspaper. It wasn't like in a channel. So I'm not sure because I don't, you know, read the newspapers. And there's also the big case of how do you measure it, right? Because let's say there's like 4,000 articles. So what, you know, 2,000 of those that covered Bibi covered him in a more favorable light. It's very difficult to measure it.
Yep.
Yeah, but let's go back to the question you asked before about the opposition to Bibi. So Bibi basically, you know, like Trump has Trumpists, Bibi has a lot of like these hardcore fans, you know, they'll go with him wherever he goes. It's almost like a cult. You know, like you've got pictures of him and stuff like that. And now there's actually a very interesting thing that's happening within the right. It's you've got a lot of people that worked with Bibi and are turning against him. So that one of the main political opponents to Bibi is Gideon Sa'ar. Gideon Sa'ar was in Bibi's party. He tried to, in the primaries, he tried to run against Bibi in the Likud. He lost, and now he made his own party. It's called the New Hope. Yeah, it's a funny name, like Star Wars, The New Hope. Yeah, a lot of people made fun of him. Yeah, he's running against Bibi. He's basically like a right winger against Bibi, which is kind of like what's happening in the United States, where you see a lot of Republicans turning against Trump. So there's the question if Trumpism is going to stay in the Republican Party. So now we are kind of contending with a very similar question, if the right is going to divorce itself from Bibism.
Is there any conflict within these two parties between sort of more of a libertarian perspective on policy and traditional conservative? Because a lot of like the traditional conservatives were sort of against Trump on the right somewhat in America.
Yeah. So the sad thing is that there's less talk about policy here, and it's mostly personal. Like the thing that journalists ask people or party leaders, are you going to sit with Bibi? Because in Israel, like as I told you, you have to make a coalition. So a lot of people are saying we're not going to get into a coalition with that person, or we're going to sit with we're not going to sit with this party. Like we're boycotting this party. So whenever journalists, like let's say you want to run for the Knesset, they're always going to ask you, are you going to sit with Bibi? Yes or no, and why? And even if it's going to cost us a fifth round of election. So there's not really much talk about policy. It's mainly talk about Bibi, his personal affairs, his legal trouble, and maybe the way he kind of garnered a lot of power within his own party, and his attacks against maybe some of the judicial system, which is also very problematic, but that's a different conversation. So it revolves around Bibi and his actions. It's you know, there's not much talk about policy, unfortunately.
How much do you think social media and very quick news sources where people don't understand or don't read any of the details of current events, how much do you think this shift in how people consume media has to do with this like polarization of personalization in politics, of making everything less and less about policy and everything more sort of like populist, but also just about their haircut, or the way they shake someone's hand, or whatever that may be. How much do you think that the way that news is consumed now, on a much more less attention span based nature, has to do with that?
I think this is the process you mentioned is very prominent in Israel, and I think that's one of the contributing factors to the personalization of our politics, and to the to the more yellow stuff, and very gossipy stuff. A lot of the way people consume media here, it's kind of like a big reality TV show, very much like in other countries as well. And you see the news coverage, and it's ridiculous. It's about like very personal stuff, like what this person had an affair with another person, and the different like conflicts within the party. So I think this is one of the reasons that people are also very tired of politics here. But it also created a lot of echo chambers. I mean, we had 3 rounds of elections, and the groups, the different factions, they never moved. Like, Israel is a very polarized country, and I can go over all the different groups. But if you usually, when you do polls in Israel for the government, you see out of the 120 seats, how much goes to the left, how much goes to the right, and how much goes to, let's say, I don't know, Arabs, or there's one guy that doesn't go with anyone, so they always include him in the polls. So it's like the leftist bloc is, let's say, 46 people. The right bloc is like 55, and other blocks as well. So you see that people don't move. People are just in their echo chambers, and there's a new guy, new party. Here we have got new parties every election, so it's not like in the States where you've got 2 parties, or maybe in the UK we've got, let's say, 5 parties. Here you have like 12 parties, and each election cycle, like 4 parties don't reach the threshold. Like, you have to reach a certain threshold in order to get into the Knesset. Like, if you don't get 3.25% of the votes, you don't get any seats. So you've got new parties coming up, and other parties that didn't make it, so they're just destroyed.
So let's sort of touch on that. Let's talk about how there's been 4 elections in the last 2 years, right? So the most recent one is this scandal with Bibi, right?
Well, it's been the scandal throughout the past 3 election cycles as well.
Okay, so all of them are to do with these scandals with Bibi.
Yeah. So the thing is, during the first election, I believe he was still, like a suspect. He wasn't indicted. In Israel, the way criminal persecutions work is that the Attorney General needs to give his okay. We're going to indict him. So he said we're going to indict Bibi. I think maybe like a week before the second round of elections in September 2019. So all of the elections have been about that. It's like a referendum about Bibi.
What do you think is going to happen? When is the trial?
Oh, the trial. Yeah. So that was also the thing. The trial was supposed to start in March this year, and then they postponed it. So the trial was supposed to start, I think, in February this year, but they also postponed it. So Bibi also made one appearance, like his first appearance in court, which was like very symbolic. But I think now, like, his lawyers are filing some new requests from the courts because they claimed that the way that the persecution started was unlawful. So maybe that the persecution needs to be dropped. I don't think they'll drop it because if you work in the Israeli version of the DOJ, in the Justice Department, you have a lot of fervor to indict. Like, you worked on this case, you don't want this case to fail. So I don't think they're going to drop it. But yeah, his trial is I think they postponed it after the elections.
Right. What are the main key aspects of policy that politicians in Israel sort of market during their campaigns? So some of those might be ones, if we take away this personal aspect to it, that people are upset or that love BB4. So in terms of foreign affairs in the Middle East or the, like domestic issues, that are there some main policy areas that always get brought up during these elections?
Definitely. So I think in most Western countries, like the right and left divide is mostly around economic issues. I think that was also the case in the United States until Trump came into the picture. So in here, like the main thing that divides the right and the left is with regards to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Like the left mostly wants to be like to make more concessions, and there's also the issue of settlements, which is extremely complicated, and we can talk about it maybe another time. And the right,
just briefly, in settlements, do you mean economic wise or land based or
yeah.
both?
So there's the West Bank, which is a disputed area, and Israel built settlements there. It's called the Green Line. Like the Green Line is kind of like the de facto border of like without the West Bank. With West Bank, you've obviously got like the Jordan Valley. So the left doesn't like building settlements, and they kind of want to reach an agreement with Palestinians. So kind of want to please them more, or don't want to build outside of the Green Line. So that's one issue. There's also the issue of security. So anything that has to do with security and Palestinians, which was the big axis of elections, mostly during the 90s. Now recently, there's been a change towards, I would say, politics of populism versus elitism. So the left in Israel is really shrunk, and the left in Israel is mostly people from rich cities. So it's like in the United States, how you've got like more liberals in San Francisco, New York, and like coastal cities, and you've got like rural America that's like more Republican. And I'm using the American example not only because it's very known, but it's because it's very similar. So in here, the right is more populist, and it's like the rhetoric is like we're the real like people. We're like the real Israel. We're fighting against elites that have been controlling the country. Even there's a term that people use: the first Israel and the second Israel. So the first Israel is like the elitist rich people from Tel Aviv and Herzliya, and second Israel are the people from like small poor cities that are not in the center of Israel. So I think this is like everything that has to go around this narrative has been very popular. And also, obviously, the right is more religious and traditional and nationalistic than the left, which is like more, like in America, less nationalistic and more secular. And there's also the issue of the judicial system. I think it's been brought up mostly in with regards to Bibi's cases, but we've got like a big issue with the judicial system. Here, we don't really have a constitution. And we've got extremely activist courts. So there's a lot of charges against the judges of them being too liberal and not representing the people. And also they're not really elected, so they're not accountable. So obviously the right here is more like angry about the way it works and wants to reform it, and the left sees like the judicial system is the last cornerstone of the democracy, and if you change the way that the courts work and the judicial system works, you basically ruin democracy. So I don't think it's a very deep argument like in the public discourse. It's a deep argument in the sphere of law and governance, but not like in the public sphere. But these are the main issues.
Okay, and are there any sort of current events that are going on in the Middle East at the moment, other than like historical things like with Palestine? But like, is there any current events at the moment which there is a big divide on? Obviously, the annexation of the West Bank would have been one last year. Are there any other foreign policy areas that are current at the moment or contemporary that is sort of dividing Israel?
In terms of foreign policy, I don't think there's anything. We talked about the Israeli-Palestinian issue briefly, which is, I think it requires like a talk of its own. But in terms of foreign policy, Bibi's had a lot of accomplishments. I mean, Israel normalized relations with 4 countries, as I said, and there might be even like another one, during the last days of the Trump presidency, and there are even more connections, like hidden connections between Israel and Saudi Arabia, but I don't think there's anyone that opposes this normalization. Like, everyone is happy. So
What about with the new American government? Is there a conflict between Biden and Bibi? Or will there be one? And in turn, will there be the potential for America to sort of back these allegations against him?
I don't think America is going to intervene with domestic affairs in Israel with regard to Bibi's trial, but obviously Trump has been very influential and is regarded to be very good for Israel because Pompeo, he announced that settlements in the West Bank are no longer regarded as illegal by the American DOJ. Which is pretty influential, and he recognized Israeli sovereignty in the Golan Heights, and he moved the American embassy to Jerusalem. So Israelis here really like Trump. I think with Biden, they expect him to be, let's say, less favorable towards Israel, but most analysts say that Biden is not really like Obama, because like Obama is regarding Israel as like very anti-Israel in Israel. That's like his image. Which is, we can debate that, but Biden is regarded as not as good as Trump for Israel, but better than Obama. So we'll have to see, because Biden, he's been in relations with Israel since he was a senator in 1972. So he's been historically very pro-Israel.
But in saying that, there has been more of a progressive shift in his publicized ideology, politically wise. Especially sort of taking advantage of some very progressive movements during the election campaign last year. Within those social movements, there is a correlation with like an anti-Israel dissent or movement as well within those circles. Do you think that there is? I know you've told me before that Biden has come out and said that he's still pro-Israel, but is there a sentiment that, or maybe amongst the right in Israel, that they're scared that an anti-Israel sentiment is going to be introduced with this new Democrat government in the US, or are people not really worried?
No, the right here is very worried about it, because the way the Israeli-American relations work is mostly through connections that Israel has within both the Republican and Democratic parties in the United States, and through AIPAC, which is the Action Group of American Jews. I don't know if you've heard of AIPAC.
I haven't, no.
So AIPAC is basically, I'm not sure what it stands for, but it's basically kind of like an action group, kind of like a PAC, the political action groups in the United States, where they have, it's kind of like the Israeli lobby in the American Congress, and they're very powerful. This is one of the reasons that America has been very favorable to Israel over the years, and it's got people from both parties. It's like their idea is to be very bipartisan, because they're trying to advocate for Israel's interest and not just within one party. So one of the issues here is people are worried about the politicization of Israel within American politics, because traditionally both the Republicans and the Democrats were very supportive of Israel. And as you've said, within the Democratic parties, usually with the more kind of radical factions, there's been more dissent towards Israel. There is, I think they're called the four horsewomen of the Democrat Party: Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, AOC, and another one that I forgot. So they're like obviously more anti-Israel. AOC boycotted some event in memory of Yitzhak Rabin, which was like even like a leftist prime minister in Israel that tried to negotiate a peace deal with the Palestinians. So there's a lot of uncertainty of how that will affect the uh, uh, the Democratic Party institutions and how it will affect Biden. Because Biden, I would say, from my impression, is one of the most pro-Israeli members of the party, because he's kind of the old generation, like the democratic establishment. So it's really, I'm not sure what's going to happen in American politics if this kind of
Yep.
strand of more progressive leaning young politicians within the Democratic Party is going to influence Biden. But I think that he's going to obviously have more pressure from his base than what Trump had. Trump had evangelical support for advocating towards more um, actions that are intended to appease his evangelical base. So I'm not sure what's going to happen, but we'll have to see.
Yeah. It'd be interesting to see Kamala Harris's influence as well.
Yeah,
in terms of
she's married to a Jew, so there's also a question if that's going to affect her or not.
Okay. Let's just quickly take it back to this political instability in Israel. Why do you think there is this instability? Is it just a question of Bibi and of people not liking him, or is it a question of polarization and personalization in politics? Or what do you think is the root cause that there's been there's 4 elections in 2 years and there seems to be this turmoil?
Well, I think the institutions of our election process and the institutions of the state are not, I don't think that they were thought of in a critical manner when Israel was established during wartime. And the thing is, because you can dismiss the Knesset whenever you want to. It's kind of like in the UK. Theoretically, in the UK, you can go to elections right now if the parliament dismisses itself. So, but they rarely do that. Usually they don't go to elections every 2 years. I mean, they went to election in 2017 and 2019. But in Israel, it's more frequent than that. I think one of the main reasons is both the constitutional reason of the way that Israel is formed and we don't have a constitution, and the way power works here is not there's a lot of uncertainty, who has the authority to do what. So there is a lot more chaos because we don't have a codified constitution. And I think the second case is that Israel is very, very diverse in terms of population. So we've got very sectorial parties. So let's say we've got the ultra-Orthodox. So the ultra-Orthodox have their own party, and they don't claim to work for all of the citizens of Israel. They're kind of like a lobbying group. So you've also got another divide in Israel. So you've got Jews of Ashkenazi origin, which are Jews from Europe, from Eastern Europe, and you've got Jews from the Arab world, which are called Mizrahi Jews. These are the Jews that came from Morocco, from Egypt, from Yemen, from Iran. So the Ashkenazi Jews are seen as to be more privileged because they came to Israel first and are richer. So mostly, if you're poor, you tend to be Mizrahi, you tend to be more religious, you tend to be more right-wing. So there's you've got Likud party is a party that works on the base of Mizrahim, of Sephardic Jews. Also within the ultra-Orthodox, you've got ultra-Orthodox Ashkenazi, ultra-Orthodox Sephardic Jews. And you've got a party for Russian immigrants. We've had a lot of immigrants from Russia, like Russian Jews. So they've got their own party. And you've got a party for the people who are religious. It's a different sector, religious and ultra-religious. So they've got their own party. So it's very sectorial politics. It's very similar to the kind of the politics that is done in, I don't know, even Arab countries, like in Lebanon. Lebanon, you've got the Druze, you've got the Shiites, you've got the Maroons, you've got the Orthodox Christians. So it's a fractured society, and we don't have one group that's the majority. Bibi, who's seen as the representing the people, the most amount of seats that he won in any election was 36 seats out of 120. So barely over a quarter of the seats. He got, I think, 27% of the vote. So if the biggest party is 27% of the vote, you can see why the political situation is extremely fragile here. You have to make a
Yeah,
coalition with so many people, so it's very difficult.
100%. That's really interesting. Do you think you said that he was prime minister for 12 years? Is that right?
Consecutive 12 years. He was
Yeah.
also in 3 years in the 90s.
So do you think that there should be like some sort of limit on the terms that the prime minister should be able to serve?
So actually, Gideon Sa'ar, like his opponent that came from the Likud, he's also like very right wing as well. He said that one of the things that his party will do is limit the prime ministership for I think 8 years or something like that. And also now, like there are a lot of clips like of people that don't like Bibi. They're posting clips of Bibi from the 90s when he was prime minister, and he went to a talk show and he said, "When I'm prime minister, I'm going to limit the term for 8 years, because what you haven't done in 8 years, then you're not going to do in another term." So a lot of people are using kind of stuff Bibi said in the 90s against him right now, also in terms of his trials.
Would that not be more of a constitutional measure?
Yeah, it
That's
is
the problem, right? Like
that's a
without
real
a
problem.
constitution.
Yeah, as I've said, I think most of the problems in Israel are constitutional problems that are derived from the institutional makeup of our country and the uncertainty. So I think even the idea that you can go to elections whenever you get a majority, and it's not like in the United States where it's 4 years, the first Tuesday of November every 4 years, it happened during the Civil War, during the two world wars. It happened, like you'd have to have like Armageddon for that not to happen. And here
Yeah.
it's, if the prime minister wants to go to elections and he gets enough political leverage, he can go to election whenever he's able to politically. So I think it's a big problem.
Yeah. And then theoretically he could overturn, let's say that one prime minister creates a restriction on the terms able to be served. That's not constitutionally protected, then the subsequent party or prime minister could just overturn that, right, without a referendum process or something.
That's kind of the problem here, because we don't have a constitution.
Yeah.
The high courts, like the Supreme Court, has taken more and more power to itself since the 90s. It's called in Israeli colloquium language the constitutional revolution, or basically the Supreme Court decided that Israel does have a constitution, and there's a lot of arguments with regard to the role of courts in Israeli politics, because they've taken to themselves more roles than they were designated to by the Knesset, but we're not sure about the constitutional makeup of Israel anyways. So, no one is sure about the authority. So there's a lot of very, very deep questions about the constitutional crisis in Israel that, in my opinion, is resulting of this chaos.
Cool. Was there anything else you wanted to talk about, mate?
I guess we'll have to see, how the election is going. If you have any questions,
Definitely.
you can ask me, and we can.
No, I think that's covered it all. It's such an interesting situation. So thanks for breaking that down for us.
Of course.
Okay, make sure to follow the Rocky Road Post on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Thanks for joining us again, Atar.
Oh, thank you. Bye-bye.
We'll do it again soon.